Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you're located today. Once again, we have a truly international audience for today's Bright Talk webinar on data democratization, understanding your data using artificial intelligence, AI. Brought to you today by AIM. My name's Steve Ackland. I'm CEO of AIM, and I'd like to thank you very much for attending. So for the next 45 minutes, we'll explain why the concept of data democratization has become increasingly important in organizations who are striving to become data-led. And as we know, data-led organizations are proven to be the most successful. As understanding your data is not just about better decision-making, governance, and compliance, but it's also allow an organization to understand itself better. It's effectively the DNA of what an organization does and why. And given the huge volumes of data being created, technology has a major role to play in allowing data democratization to happen, to ensure that staff can broker information and insight from raw data, which of course is nowadays located in so many different formats, locations and systems, to assist them with their day-to-day tasks. AIM's dataEstate suite of software has been designed to support data democratization through innovative AI-led technology, and you'll hear more about that shortly. So I'm joined today by two AIM colleagues, Matt Smith and Tom Duncan. Matt is one of AIM's senior solution architects and head of product pre-sales for our dataEstate suite, and Matt will be delivering the webinar. Meanwhile, Tom is a data analyst, and he'll be assisting me with checking for any questions that you may want to raise during the session. And if you do wish to raise a question, then please do so using the Bright Talk question section. We'll attempt to raise as many as we can at the end for Matt to answer. And then finally, as a subscriber, you will receive the link to the recording after the webinar. And do make sure you look out for other future AIM webinars on a range of interesting, contemporary and leading issues in the use of new technologies. So without further ado, I'll now invite Matt to step forward to proceed with the webinar. So Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve, and hello to everybody, and thank you very much for joining. So I'm going to spend around 40 minutes or so, because we want to leave a couple of minutes at the end, as Steve said, for a few questions and answers. I'm going to start off in this slide deck, and we're going to be covering essentially what data democratization is, what benefits it can bring to your organization. And then I'll move in and actually show you what our solution to this and how do we go about implementing data democratization principles within an organization. And I always like to boil down the whole webinar into a couple of sentences right at the start. So essentially we're looking at is, what is data democratization? And actually we're going to be giving you our spin on it. We take it a little bit further than some of the definitions you may see online. And how can AI-driven software help my organization have better access to data? And as we're going through, obviously, I'm going to be telling you about our view on the concept, our view on how it generally helps our customers and clients. But it's always important, of course, to try and relate that back to your business. You know your business and I don't. So I always, again, put a couple of questions right at the start here. So which areas of my business will benefit the most from data democratization? So you might start to think about, if we were to use these principles at work, which groups or teams perhaps could benefit most, and we could do a prioritization of the project, for example. And also, what positive change would this bring to my business and colleagues? Always useful, of course, when creating a business case. So in terms of the agenda, I've cut it up into two parts, so it's nice and simple. Part one has just got two bits. It's what I call the what and why of data democratization. So the what is, of course, what is it? And the why is essentially, why should you be interested in it? Why should you consider implementing some form of it within your organization? Part two is then the how. And of course, there are many ways of doing this. This is our solution to the issue, as it were, or the way of getting those principles into your organization. We're showing you today a suite of tools that come under our dataEstate banner. And this contains two tools I'm going to be talking to you about today, dataBelt and dataServe. So part 2 is all about introducing dataEstate to you. What is it and what tools are within that toolkit? I'll then give you a demonstration. So I'll actually jump into dataBelt, show you how that works, and then jump into dataServe, which is our virtual agent, which allows you to ask these, what I call data democratization questions. And then finally, at the end, we should have a few minutes for a Q&A. So let's start off basic then. What is data democratization? So it's not a piece of software. Unfortunately, you can't just go and buy it and then suddenly your organization is data democratized. It's a concept, though, that's made possible by software. It's also part of a wider concept that's called augmented analytics. And if you're interested in learning about that further, there are great articles online. Wikipedia is a good place to start, and there's lots of other articles as well. And this is all around this broader concept of using AI and machine learning to do the job of what traditionally would have been done by a data scientist or a data analyst. And then it's almost like data democratization is then the implementation of that concept within an organization and the benefits that it brings. And it's important to say that in our view, it's also a mindset. So it's not one of those things that you can just buy some software, get it implemented, and suddenly reap the rewards of it. It's about people change and organizational change as much as anything else. So ensuring that data's in a good space, you understand who has access to which data, and you also empower your colleagues to know now what they can do. You know, it can be a little bit daunting sometimes if you're not used to working with data to this degree. So there's a training element to say, right, we've now got this great software suite. You can use it to do all these great things. So it's about changing the mindset then, so people know that they can then include data democratization principles in their everyday working lives where previously perhaps they weren't. And I like to give this single sentence when it comes to the question of what is data democratization. So I say it is the concept of making data accessible. And I like to say that because the word accessible means many different things, actually, or at least from our point of view. And the next slide sort of goes into those. So what do we mean by making data accessible? No gatekeepers. That's one of the obvious ones, and you've probably read about this type of thing already. So this is the case of making it accessible in that I've got direct access to the data or direct access to insights about the data without having to go through this concept or this group of people called the gatekeepers. And these could be heads of departments, they could be database analysts, they could be SQL developers, whoever it might be, where if you needed to understand, you know, how much HR data do you have, for example, you might have to go to the head of HR, you might need to go to the person that looks after the servers that their applications run on, for example. Those are the types of people we call gatekeepers. And data democratization is all about bypassing them, not in a malicious way, but not having to actually bother them with questions, because if you've got the right permissions to do so, you can get insights into that information without going through the gatekeepers. Natural language queries are very important as well. So it's all well and good knowing things like SQL, being able to be a developer or a coder and create complex reports and that type of thing. But most of us do not have those skills. However, we usually know what we want. I can verbalize the types of questions I want answered by the data. So for example, you know, how much sensitive data do we have on this server? I can verbalize that. I might not be able to write a SQL statement about it, but I can verbalize it. And then linked to that is the ability to then receive natural language insights. So again, asking questions about data, it's all well and good, but if the information that comes back to you is then hard to understand, it might be very complex. It might be a big sort of JSON file in a notepad or something that doesn't ring true with you and isn't easily understandable. That is definitely not in line with data democratization. So how do we get insights back that are easy to understand and are as natural as the question that we asked? Now, this is where we take data democratization a little bit further is this concept of it being open to all. Now, you might think, well, that's obvious. The whole point of data democratization is that everyone within an organization can ask questions and get insights about data. But what we mean by this are people with accessibility needs. So perhaps somebody who is blind or partially sighted, or somebody who has dexterity issues. It's important that everybody within an organization is given the right tools to do their job. And if we're putting in data democratization, it's important that those groups of people aren't excluded from doing so. So we have a heavy focus in our tooling on making it accessible. If you're interested, we are WCAG compliant. So we have assessments done to make sure that we are compliant with the latest standards. And it means people with accessibility needs can use our virtual agent with a screen reader. They can use its inbuilt text-to-speech and speech-to-text to use it. And it also can be completely driven using your voice or with your keyboard, not necessarily needing a mouse to use it. So those are the types of principles that we at AIM and within dataEstate, that's very key to our software development approach. And also linked to that is no training needed. So, I mean, usually there might be a few minutes to say this is where you log on to and this is how you can use it. People need to know what they can do so that they can be empowered by the software. But it should be relatively straightforward to use. And I like to give the example of Facebook. Nobody's ever had a training course on how to use Facebook. We kind of log on there, click around and work out how it works. And that's another thing that I think is important when it comes to this accessible principle within data democratization. Because if the software is hard to use, well, it's not democratized. So why should you consider data democratization then, and what benefits could it bring to your organization? And I've just come up with 6 here. They're relatively standard ones, and obviously they're not tuned to your specific organization. And that's why I said at the start, it's quite important to ask yourself those questions as I'm sort of giving you these answers, so you know that how it might work within your organization. And I won't spend too long on these, but the usual things like being able to speed up decision making because I don't need to go through a gatekeeper. I can uncover hidden opportunities because suddenly data is related to other data. And I didn't know that relationship was in place before, and now I do. Better decision making as well. We can make decisions based on what we know, not what we think we know. Improved staff sentiment is a pretty big one. Sometimes it is missed off these types of lists, and I don't think it should be understated, whereby if an employee or a colleague is given the right tools to do their job effectively and they're happy as a result, I think those types of people are more likely to stay at an organization and be more effective there while they are there. So improving staff sentiment by just letting them be able to do their job, using software that's easy to use, not having to go through gatekeepers, not missing deadlines is a very important thing. Decrease costs. Of course, usually there's costs involved in these types of projects, software licensing, implementation project costs, that type of thing. But part of the business case would be considering, maybe we don't need to hire external data scientists on a contract basis, for example, because our data is now democratized. And also kind of linked to the bottom one there around staff sentiment, but empowering colleagues to be data-driven. So people can do much more on their own. They can actually rely on themselves to do their job and not other teams and other people. So there's a few different benefits there. And I just wanted to spend some time just before we go into the demonstration part discussing without dataEstate or similar tooling that will allow you to be democratized in terms of your data, why it's tricky to get those benefits without this type of software. So even in an ideal world, using the approach of the gatekeepers, you've got your data down at the bottom left there, user community at the top right. How do they have access to that data? Well, as you saw, you've got the gatekeepers there. And even in an ideal world whereby the user community sends their request to the gatekeeper, they analyze the data, send the answer back to the user community. Even if that happened with every single request and it was done in good time and the information was readable and understandable, you still wouldn't get the whole suite of benefits that data democratization brings. And if you consider that that's an ideal world, well, what's the reality like with this gatekeepers concept? For example, you can have issues like requests being denied. And that's fine. It could be for a very good reason that the requester should not have access to that particular data area. So that request could be denied, and that's expected. However, if it takes a week or two for that request to be denied, then that requester is behind on their project. So that's one of the issues that this type of setup can cause. Missed deadlines is another. It takes a long time to analyze data using more manual means. And again, even if the gatekeepers do that good analysis and it's understandable by the requester, it might take too long, and that requester might miss their deadline as a result. And you also have the issue of gatekeepers can tend to be very technically minded. That's their role in this situation. They might be, as I said, people who know SQL. They might be database administrators, for example. So sometimes you have this issue whereby, again, the request is okay, it's done within time, but it's gone to the user community or the requester. It's too complicated for them to understand and causes confusion. So I just wanted to run through a couple of the reasons there why this gatekeepers approach isn't ideal. It's, of course, by no means an exhaustive list. So what's our solution then? Our dataEstate toolkit, as I mentioned, it contains a number of different software tools that are all integrated together. But there's these two at the bottom that I wanted to talk to you about today. So we have dataBelt on the left. This is a data governance tool that allows you to index and classify your data using machine learning and AI. What we then have over on the right-hand side is dataServe. This is our virtual agent and automation engine. And so these two work in tandem. dataBelt does all of that heavy lifting, number crunching, data duplication, trying to find where duplicates exist, trying to improve data quality, all of those different things. The user can interact directly with dataBelt if they wish, but in terms of data democratization, interacting with our virtual agent over on the right-hand side there to ask questions of dataBelt indexes is the way to go. So how does that look then within our now familiar diagram? The gatekeeper is essentially replaced there by dataBelt, which is going through, analyzing the data, indexing and classifying it. And the user community simply puts their request through the dataServe virtual agent. It gets its answer from dataBelt and then feeds that back to the user. So you can see there why the software in this type of setup would enable you to reap all of the benefits of data democratization, because you're removing the gatekeeper, you're using AI and machine learning, so that augmented analytics concept that I'm going to speak to you about shortly, and using dataServe to have natural language questions and to receive natural language answers. And our solution is unique in that we do, in this other way as well, take data democratization a little bit further. So whereby you saw earlier, our definition of it was a little bit further in terms of accessibility needs and that type of thing. Where we also take it further is around this insight plus action approach. So what I mean by that, over on the left-hand side there, you've got standard data democratization, which provides you insight, such as data quality is poor. And that's great. That's a natural language answer to potentially a natural language question. What we then do is allow you to take action based on that insight. And this is a concept that we call democratized data processing. So we get the insight, just like you have over on the left-hand side there. But dataServe and dataBelt working in tandem together actually allows you to then take action on any data issues you find. So we're not just saying data quality is poor, but we can also then say, let's improve it. And I'm going to show you one example of how we can do that using the tooling. So moving on to the demonstration, I'm going to start off with a very brief overview of dataBelt. I'm going to essentially show you the main page and just give you a couple of sentences about it. And then we'll go through this concept of indexing, classifying, and finding data relationships. And I'll sort of walk you through, and it will be at a good pace, because of course we want to leave time for questions. I'm going to walk through essentially how we implement dataBelt, the steps that we go through, so you can see clearly that actually it's not a mammoth task to implement dataBelt. And then move into dataServe. Again, I'll give you a couple of sentences about what it is, and then I'm going to go into 3 different use cases, and they're essentially 3 chats with the virtual agent that really encapsulate, I think, the data democratization concept. And then at the end, I'll show you some of our accessibility features, and we'll talk about mobile support because it's available on the go. Whatever device you have, it's all responsive. So you can do all the stuff I'm going to show you today on your phone, tablet, laptop, PC. So the use cases we're going to look at is around these 3 here. So, and again, not an exhaustive list about what we can do with the software. I could probably show you, 25 different things. But again, with time on my mind, I'm going to show you 3. So data quality checks. Please find where we have our biggest data quality issues. That is a nice natural language question about a complex subject. And I'm going to show you how the virtual agent answers that. We can also help with things like PII audits. So that stands for personally identifiable information. And as you probably know, under data protection legislation and GDPR and equivalents across the world, we usually have to make sure that personal information about people, customers, etc., isn't over-hoarded or stored in the wrong place and that type of thing. So we can ask questions like, please check to see if there's personal data on our public servers. And then finally, just because I wanted to show you our integration with ChatGPT, and I'm sure you've probably all had a bit of a play around with that, or you've seen some videos on LinkedIn or YouTube about different uses of ChatGPT. What we then do is the dataServe virtual agent integrates with OpenAI using our connector, and we can ask these GPT-driven questions and conversations about actual specific pieces of data. So I'm going to show you whereby the first 2 use cases here are sort of more about big data. This third one is actually about the concept that data democratization isn't just about the big things. It could also be about understanding a particular document. So I'm going to show you that as well. Right, let's jump in then and start off with dataBelt. Okay. So this is dataBelt. So this is our data governance tool. It does a lot of different things, certainly not just what I'm showing you today. So I wanted to start off on what we call our services tab here, just to give you an idea of all the different things dataBelt does. Essentially, it's all underpinned by its ability to do this indexing and AI and machine learning classification. All these different things sort of hang off that functionality. So you can start doing things like data forensics and fraud detection, data hygiene, data privacy. You can also create something called a data blueprint, which I'm going to show you a bit later. So all of these things together allow you to index your data wherever it is. So we don't just do structured or we don't just do unstructured. We do both types of data. So things like data in a database is your sort of traditional structured data, and Word documents and PNG files, etc. within a file share. That's your unstructured data. So we do all of that, and wherever it resides, it could be in the cloud, it could be in Azure, could be OneDrive, could be SharePoint, could be on premise. Whatever it is, we can index that data and then allow you to do all these different things that you see on screen. So let me talk you through briefly then the types of processes we go through when it comes to implementing dataBelt. So we start off with coming up with a data map. And this is an understanding of where data resides throughout the organization. And naturally, we've got a very basic example here of some file shares on a server. We have a HR database there and links into the AIM, SharePoint, and OneDrive locations. And we actually have an automated file share discovery process that we kick off to auto-populate the information that you see here. So it's a relatively quick process. So this is just where is our data? what data are we interested in indexing so that we can ask questions about it, so that we can have this data democratization concept. And you can also see that information, if I just zoom out a little bit, we have lots of different ways of visualizing it. So here as an example, we've got a few different configuration items that you can see, and you can zoom all the way in. So a global view all the way down to the street level if you're interested to see where your data resides. It's particularly good actually when it comes to cybersecurity and that type of thing. That's why this tab is called cybersecurity. It gives context to things like data breaches because you know where your data is, you know the sensitivity of it, its risk index, and all those good things, so that you can provide context to things like cyber attacks. So once we've done that and we understand where our servers are, are we interested in indexing SharePoint or wherever it is? Once we've done that initial data map, we then get to our indexing stage. And this is where we send dataBelt's workers, its crawler, as we call it, over to all those different locations to index the data. And what I'm going to do is just very quickly come out of dataBelt. I want to show you this video here. It's a good visualization of what happens. So each of these people that you can see on screen are dataBelt workers. And I appreciate it's a little bit hard to see as we're quite zoomed out at the moment, but it does zoom in. And what they're doing is going to all those different locations in that data map that I showed you earlier. And they're iteratively going through the different folder and file structures. And they start off by doing what I call basic indexing. It's looking at basic metadata like file names, file sizes, file types, that type of thing. That's then where our AI machine learning comes in, and we actually analyze those individual pieces of data to understand things like its risk, its sensitivity rating, and that type of thing. And when that indexing process is completed, you get something like this in dataBelt. So this is an overview of that index. You can see the index start time and the end time. This took less than a minute to run. And it's a small one, right? Like ordinarily we're dealing with terabytes and petabytes. This is just a quick one for demo purposes. So we've got about 3,300 files indexed there. We've managed to find 3 duplicates because that's part of the scanning process, is to understand relationships between bits of data where something may have been copied and sort of leaked somewhere where it shouldn't have been. And you can see we've got a combined record sizes there of around 1 gigabyte. And over on the right, you've got a visualization. I know at a glance that the data that's within this index is primarily PNG images. What you can also see is our directory tree. And you can actually zoom in and go down into each of the files and the folders here to understand what's in there. You can actually navigate the folder structure just like you would do within Windows. You can do that within dataBelt too. And just one of the outputs that you can get as well, let's say I was interested in reducing the amount of duplicated data that we have. There's lots of good reasons to do that for things like security and cost reduction and that type of thing. This is then that type of visualization that you get from dataBelt. We have identified that a particular file has been duplicated 4 times actually across 2 different indexes. So you can see this is primarily where it originated. It's then leaked into this index over on the right-hand side here. And we use lots of different algorithms to do that. We can do very quick ones using hash comparisons. But we also have a couple of algorithms like Jacquard and USE that allow us to really dive into a document and see how similar it is, not just whether it's duplicated, but how similar it is to another document. And finally, while those indexes are going on, they could be scheduled every hour, every day, every week. It's entirely up to you. It's all about how quick that data changes and how important it is that you're kept up to date with every single change that happens. So those indexes are run on a schedule, and you can then visualize them. So again, demo purposes, quite a basic one here, but you can see how data is growing over time in terms of the number of files that are in that particular area. let's pretend this is HR data. Suddenly we've had this massive spike, and we can see that we've suddenly had a lot more data that's classified as HR. And for each of those index runs, we create what's called a snapshot. This is all configurable. It's a no-code builder here. And I can choose a particular date and time. You can see this one ran last at just around 7:10 this morning. And I can click through and just understand the types of data, the makeup of that index at any single point. And I can compare it to other snapshots to see how the data lineage has changed over time. So that's dataBelt. We've said, right, here's everything that's in scope of our data democratization project. We now want to index it and ask questions about it. So now that that's been done, we can then jump into dataServe. So if you imagine dataBelt being the heavy lifter that's sort of in the background churning away, yes, you can actually, by dataBelt on its own, go into it and ask questions by raising queries. But if you really want to extend this data democratization concept to everybody, dataServe is a really great way of doing it, because it is a self-service portal, it's an automation engine, it's a virtual agent, and it's a very usable user interface that you can give to anybody, and they can ask their natural language questions. We have a search bar here, so if you're using dataServe just to find documents that dataBelt's indexed, you can do a quick search in here, search for whatever you like, and it will come up with an answer, including a match percentage, as you can see there next to it. But where this really shines, and where really dataServe comes into its own with this data democratization concept, is with our virtual agent. So our virtual agent is called Amy. You can call the virtual agent whatever you like. You can use whatever avatar you like. Everything you see on screen here, although I appreciate I've branded this with AIM colors and logos and the like, it's all completely configurable with a no-code branding and page layout builder. So let's kick off a conversation with Amy and see what it looks like. And just to say, Amy supports speech to text, which I'm going to show you shortly, so I can talk to Amy in a natural language way and get answers back. But Amy also supports text to speech, so Amy has a voice and can talk back to you. So essentially, I can have a conversation with Amy without touching my mouse and keyboard and get this data democratization data insight back. Just note that BrightTalk doesn't actually allow the sharing of computer audio. So I have turned off Amy's voice, but you can see down here, this is where you'll be able to turn that on if you were to go ahead with dataServe. So what I'm going to do here is say, great, that I found what I was looking for there. And I'm going to use my voice to ask questions that are related to those 3 different use cases that I mentioned earlier. So we're going to start off with the one that's to do with data quality checks. Please find where we have our biggest data quality issues. Oh, I need to click the button. Apologies. Please find where we have our biggest data quality issues. And what Amy has done is, in dataBelt, there are jobs called ETL jobs. This stands for extract, transform, and load. And these allow us to do these data quality checks. So let's say, yes, we want to run one of those. And Amy is saying you have a few data areas under your control. Is there a specific area we should focus on today? So I'm going to say, let's look at HR data. So Amy is now interacting with dataBelt and asking it to run those ETL jobs. And Amy is telling us that the lowest data quality is in the users table or database within the HR area. And the worst performing column is sex with 10 validation errors. Data quality is currently sitting at 98.13%. And she's asking what we would like to do. So I'm going to say I want to view the DQI report. This stands for Data Quality Index. And let me just show you what that looks like. This is an export from dataBelt, and you can see that's our data quality currently. And these are the various columns, or what we call widgets, within that database. And you can see where the data issues reside. And then this is then where we take that data democratization process, not just from insight, but to action. So we can say, okay, great, that's interesting that we have some data quality issues there. Maybe the column is meant to say, for example, male, but actually it contains just M. So we know that's a data quality issue. And dataBelt understands how M can be translated to male so that it can be correct. So we're going to say, yes, please run the data transformations. And you can see 10 records have been corrected. Data quality is now at 99.68%. So there's just those 2 records remaining out of those 640 that are incorrect. So that's how the data quality checks work. Apologies, you probably saw my speech to text didn't work there. The mic, I think, possibly because I'm sharing my mic through BrightTalk, it was playing up. The next thing I want to show you then is around PII audits. So looking at personally identifiable information and where it sits, where it perhaps shouldn't be. So I'm going to ask another question to Amy and show you what that looks like. So please check to see there's personal data on our public servers. What Amy's going to do now is create what we call a case in dataBelt. A case was created as well when we ran our ETL jobs earlier. And it's important to understand this case principle. Everything in dataBelt that we do is audited, because as you can appreciate, we're actioning things. We're not just getting insight. So it's important that all of that is permissioned and that we have a full audit trail of any data that has changed. So let's create a case to run through that. There we go. We've got case 15 created, and let's run that analysis to see where we have any personally identifiable information. And this is where the AI and machine learning comes into it. We're looking at the content of those files, the records in the database, and using things like regular expressions and Keras models and that type of thing. We're able to actually define and classify a piece of information. And what I can do here is say, okay, we found 137 items of personal data on this drive. I want to redact it. And Amy will communicate with dataBelt on my behalf and get that done. Finally, and I'm conscious of time, what I mentioned earlier is this is not just about big data. This is also about democratizing the understanding of individual documents potentially. So just to explain that concept a bit further, if I type in AIM sales, Amy's done a search there, and we've got our latest sales report. Do note this is fictional numbers that you're seeing here. So this isn't a particularly long document, but imagine it is. Imagine this has got loads and loads of data in it, lots of numbers, and I want to democratize the understanding of what's in that report. That's where dataServe, along with dataBelt, and also our integration with ChatGPT comes in. So I'm going to say I want to have a conversation with Amy about this document. And I want to ask a specific question, which is, who is the top salesperson across all 3 categories? So these are the different categories of services that we provide. There we go. We can see Steve Ackland there, a very impressive sales number there for Q1 of 2023. And that's gone off to OpenAI, analyzed that document, sent the question along with it as well, along with a prompt which tells ChatGPT how to handle that question. And then it's coming back, it's actually analyzing the numbers in that document. And although ChatGPT is very much sort of it's a text AI, it can even do things like basic mathematics, as you saw there, adding up and understanding that Steve Ackland appears in those 3 different tables, adding up his scores and comparing it to everybody else's. So it's very clever stuff that, as I said, democratizes the small as well as the large. So I'm going to say thank you very much to Amy. Nothing else to deal with right now. And I can come back later, of course, and ask any other questions that I'd like to. So that ends the demonstration part. And all I'm going to do is just open up our QA and next steps slide here and open the floor to Steve and Tom to see if there are any questions that have come in as I've been talking.
Thanks very much indeed, Matt. Very informative as always, and on a very, very important topic, which will only get more important, I think, over time as people really do grasp the use of technology to help them with understanding their data better. We do have some questions that have come in. I'm going to pass to Tom first of all to put the first one to you.
Yeah, sure. I have one sent in here from Oliver. It is, I'm not an AI expert, so how would I change or tune the AI and machine learning models when my needs change?
Yeah, thanks for that. So the dataEstate tooling, it's all been built around this no-code approach. And I like to think of it as aimed at somebody who is like a business analyst. It's aimed at those types of individuals. So you don't need to be a developer or a coder to do these things. It's all drag and drop, point and click, that type of thing. So my sort of brief answer to that is you certainly don't need to be an AI expert or a coder or a developer in order to administer our tooling. It's just based around simply being able to use intuitive software is pretty much the only prerequisite.
Okay, thank you. I've got one here from Raja who asks, this actually links back to a webinar that we provided a few weeks back. Very impressive. They say you mentioned about the use of ChatGPT. How do you keep that secure? Because they've read several articles in the news about some sort of unhappy events using ChatGPT for different organizations. So how do we keep ChatGPT or generative AI secure?
Yeah, we see this quite a bit where it's new technology and everybody's interested in using it. So once they've worked out what their use case is, which is usually the most challenging bit, this is some great technology. How do we use it though? Once that's been achieved, they'll say, well, okay, I want to use ChatGPT. That's basically sharing our data with OpenAI, who is the company that makes it. And usually OpenAI isn't going to be a data processor of a company. The company might not have done, for example, a data protection impact assessment on sharing data over to OpenAI. And it is a concern because a lot of people actually not using our tooling necessarily. It's more people literally just going to the ChatGPT website who are in an organization, and not maliciously or anything, but they might be putting in, for example, that sales report there and asking for a summary. And that's a concern to people because you're sharing potentially sensitive information with a data processor that you haven't sort of vetted, so to speak. The way we usually get around that, and what our suggestion is actually ChatGPT can be deployed in Azure. It's quite easy to do. And most people will have, of course, a data processing agreement with Microsoft, and therefore they'll be much more comfortable in actually using our Azure OpenAI connector as opposed to our standard OpenAI connector. So that's normally what I'd say there, Steve. To that question is, yeah, the solution is generally to actually just use our Azure OpenAI connector because Microsoft is a trusted data processor of most organizations.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much. While stick with me, I've got another question I'll pass back to Tom. So Jolia has said that they're in a large international organization. Does the dataEstate, dataBelt, dataServe, does it scale well to large enterprises which are based all over the world?
Thanks for that. Yes, we have some very clever technology under the hood in terms of how it's deployed. Just as an example, if you look at dataServe, that's traditionally deployed in Azure using containers and Kubernetes. And I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in all those things. We have very technical minded people that do this day in, day out. But essentially, because we use very modern deployment methods, it allows APIs to be spun up at will. So if you've got a very large organization, let's say you've got 100,000 users. And the mornings are very quiet. You might only have 1,000 users using the system. That might be handled by a single API. And then suddenly lunchtime hits and you get 50,000 people log on. The software scales automatically in terms of the number of APIs and the server processing that's dedicated to the app, so it can always be served to the user community. And it's actually, and I appreciate this question wasn't asked, but as a result of that, upgrades and that type of thing are seamless, because what will happen is if I'm on API A and a new release comes in, essentially what will happen is the API B will be updated to the latest release. My session would be moved over to that API, and API A will then be updated. So users can actually continue using the system even while releases are in progress, which I think is very impressive.
Great, thanks, Matt. Tom, I have another question. I think you've got time for one more.
Yeah, sure. If you've got time for one more, we've got one here from Mike. It is, what's the biggest hurdle you come up against when trying to implement data democratization?
Great, thank you for that. The biggest hurdle, it's a good question. My mind is now currently analyzing all the projects that we've done and trying to come up with an answer for you. It's not usually the technology, and it's not usually the infrastructure. I mean, sometimes it's tricky to get approval from people to bypass firewall rules and get access to servers and that type of thing. But that's normally done pretty quickly. I think probably the biggest, I wouldn't necessarily call it a hurdle, but the thing that's always playing on my mind when it comes to these types of projects and any business change project is it's the people change, it's the mindset change. And so I think the biggest challenge, I would probably call it, is making sure that the user community is well versed on what you're doing and why, and actually ensuring that they know now that there is a new way of working that is tremendously better for you and can actually help you do your job quicker. I think sometimes people can be a bit overfaced and might be a little bit nervous to do a new way of working because they're so used to just going to a database admin saying, give me the answer to this question, please. Once they know that they can do it themselves, I think there's a bit of a sort of a mental hurdle perhaps for a lot of people to get over, to know that actually they're empowered now to do that themselves. But with the right sort of engagement in the project and the right training throughout the project as well, that's usually something that can be overcome for most people.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Matt. I think we're sort of getting towards just a little bit over the 45 minutes. So I think we draw a close now. Just to say thank you very much indeed, Matt Smith, for that very illuminating discussion around data democratization. Hopefully those of you listening took something away of interest in that. Obviously, if you want to discuss any of those details further about data democratization or any other aspects around your data or analysis or around software, then please do get in touch. Matt's details and my details are now presented, and obviously just come to us and we'll do our very best to help you. Just remind everybody that those who are subscribed obviously are on the call will get a copy in due course from BrightTalk, the link to this recording, so you can watch that again at your leisure or share with your teams if they're interested and weren't able to make it today. And again, just to remind you to subscribe to our channel and look out for some future webinars which will be running on BrightTalk. So thank you again. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Tom, for assisting with the questions. And thank you again, everybody, for attending today. I wish you well for the rest of the day, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.